We're here tonight to listen in on Michael Brewer's experiences in Vietnam. Separated by decades, he was a Marine in Vietnam and had that experience. And then just recently, within the last year, he went back and had a completely different experience. So I think you'll appreciate the juxtaposition of these two trips and what they meant to him. So I'm going to give him the floor. I'm going to screen share so that everybody can see the presentation that Mike has put together for us. And we will let him have the microphone.
Well, since Peter is here, it was Peter who encouraged me to buy this shirt. We were only in Vietnam 1 month ago, not just in the last year. This shirt says what the lead says: Vietnam is a country, not a war. It's the only gift I bought for myself at Peter's encouragement. Well, I want to thank you guys for inviting me to share the experience of Vietnam, my experience of Vietnam. Like the old Virginia Slim ad says, we've come a long way, baby. A long way from the time when you tried to talk about Vietnam. The response at large was, oh, honey, pass the salt. Kind of a common phrase from non-vets. And the VFW days when we couldn't join the VFW because we weren't veterans of a foreign war. My name is Michael Patrick Brewer, serial number 2400698. Oh, wait, I'm not a POW. But there was a time when I was scared to death about becoming one. Actually, more scared about that prospect than being shot at, because you can shoot back. You can't shoot your captors. I offer this as a preface, as our literary history is packed with soldiers of war, many of who were POWs. St. Francis of Assisi, Geoffrey Chaucer, Kurt Vonnegut, J.D. Salinger, J.R. Tolkien, Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, William Faulkner, and then more recently, Phil Caputo and Tim O'Brien, the award-winning author of The Things We Carried, that is now assigned reading in high school and college English classes. Not much unlike the days where our high school history books had 2 paragraphs on the Vietnam War. We've clearly come a long ways. A quote: "For our fierce hero sits shell-shocked in his tent, glazed over, gazing into oblivion. He has the 10,000-yard stare." That was written by Sophocles 2,500 years ago, then made popular by a Texas artist. The only 1,000-yard stare I recall is sitting on night perimeter duty on top of a bunker, staring into pure darkness, knowing that the enemy was out there, maybe even in the wire, but seeing nothing, hearing nothing, just barking dogs in the hamlet. I learned later that this is what is known as psychological warfare. The very reason many of us former grunts lived a secret life as permanent guard dogs. I want to share a short paragraph from Marine General Smedley Butler. Next, Mike. Next slide. That's my squad in Vietnam. Boys with a normal viewpoint were taken from the fields and offices and factories and classrooms, put into the ranks. They were remolded. They were made over. They were made to about face, to regard murder as the order of the day. They were put shoulder to shoulder, and through mass psychology, they were entirely changed. We used them for a couple years and trained them to think nothing at all of killing or being killed. Then, suddenly, we discharged them and told them to make another about face. This time, they had to do their own readjusting without mass psychology, without officers' aid and advice, without nationwide propaganda. We didn't need them anymore, so we scattered them about without any speeches or parades. Many, too many of these young boys are eventually destroyed mentally because they could not make the final about face alone. That was written by one of only two-time recipients of the Medal of Honor, General Smedley Butler, and that was written after World War I. In war, the aftermath and nightmarish residuals seldom change over the years for the combatant. From Achilles to Audie Murphy, from the Peloponnesian Wars to Iwo Jima, to the heart of darkness jungles of Vietnam, to mayhem in Iraq, to the Karangal Valley in Afghanistan, the proverbial gossamer thread that creates that band of brothers and eternal camaraderie is that deep, deep knowing that we will never be the same. The loss of innocence has come to visit and stay. The combat veteran may often continue to feel a bit isolated in polite civilian society, as there is always that parallel life running beneath the surface like a Stephen King novel, just waiting to poke through. Next slide. In an effort, that's in the village with the children. Those children are probably 60 years old now. And we went in those villages to treat those children from napalm burns. We were soldiers once and young. We were patriots against the wind. Our leaders were three-legged stools. Our pictures were not pretty. 28 years ago, I wrote this. Our story had no plot. Our hope was ephemeral, and we were shunned by our own. Was it a test? Was this some metaphysical trial by fire to prepare us for the new order of things? Was it not possible that the travails of the Vietnam veterans were akin to the friction that creates diamonds? Is it not possible that our survival through times of absolute chaos and calamity has, by some accident of history, prepared us to be some of the most compassionate and moral leaders our nation has ever known? As a band of brothers and sisters, Vietnam veterans are one damn formidable force. We are an extended family fused with a brotherly love and an uncommon sense of justice without judgment. Vietnam veterans are one of the most inclusive and culturally diverse corporate bodies in our land. How poignantly ironic that the experience of the Vietnam War, when addressed and taken to heart, has literally created a profile of men and women that could lead America out of the darkness of crime and violence. From the apocalyptic and nihilistic experience of the jungle arises the light and leadership of the 21st century. The year after I wrote this, trying to be as normal as I could, I enrolled in a 19-day VA-sponsored retreat program for chronic PTSD coupled with traumatic brain injuries. I had two in Vietnam and was in a mini coma at one point. The nightmares and stabbing my pillow at night became intolerable. The program worked, along with a cafeteria of other treatment modalities over the past 30 years, leaving me with that biblical phrase, the peace that surpasses all understanding, and with some new anchors allowing me to pay forward working as a retreat director for Elder Warrior Retreat Program for combat veterans. And now, next slide. Why does your mouth get dry when you're presenting and it didn't rehearsing? That's St. Joseph Historic Cathedral in Hanoi that survived the bombing. Pretty spectacular to see that it survived with everything around it that didn't. The program worked, and that peace that surpasses all understanding pretty much has stuck with me throughout life, most of the time. And now you may ask, when one is at peace with the demons of war, why in the world would you want to return to the scene of the crime? Next slide. Reconciliation was the reason. Reconciliation with the atrocities I witnessed, many of them serving with the Republic of Korea Marines. We used to say the Korean Marines didn't get copies of Geneva Accords. Reconciliation with the well-documented lies and maligned information we were fed. The Pentagon Papers were for real. Reconciliation with the mendacity and stupidity of some of our leaders who were ill-trained for guerrilla warfare. Reconciliation with the indiscriminate use of chemical warfare. Agent Orange, napalm, they told us it was for mosquitoes. That Life magazine scene, by the way, with Kim Phuc running down the street was not us. That was the South Vietnamese Air Force that did that. And I have a Marine friend that travels with Kim Phuc to this day. And we visited the museums where the children of Agent Orange manage the museums and galleries. They're not children anymore. They're in their 60s, but they're still deformed. Reconciliation with the kill everything that moved dictum, the modus operandi of General Westmoreland. This did not happen to be the same MO of our Marine Command, who created the combined action platoons, where Marines lived in the villages with one Navy corpsman. This is where the term win the hearts and minds was frequently used. The argument about the approach to the war was insane. Can you imagine a pregame high school football game where two of your coaches are arguing over the game plan 10 minutes before the game starts? Reconciliation with the program linguistic demonization of anything Vietnamese. Dinks, gooks, Asians don't have the same respect for life as we do, so it's okay to dust them. In fact, put your weapon on the family plan. Reconciliation with the ungodly number of suicides between 1970 and 1990. 58,200 on the wall, approximately 112,000 in that same time period took their lives. I would like to tell them it came out okay in the end, sorta. And finally, reconciliation with the bad death's karma and spiritual cloud that lingers in the heartland to this day. I go to one knee, not to deliver a flag to a widow, but to beg for forgiveness and release from the stain on my soul. It is not what this former altar boy and Boy Scout intended when he responded to, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. I now know what the more recent in vogue term moral injury means. It's permanent. Next slide. That's a B-52 sculpturing that they shot down. Of course, many of you, I'm sure, recognize John McCain in the front there at the Hanoi Hilton. Some of the pictures from Hanoi Hilton we weren't allowed to download, curiously. Next. The inside of the Hanoi Hilton. Can you imagine living there for 5 years? This was at the near the end of our trip, but as I said earlier, it's not possible to show all 17 days. Next slide. The reason I put that one up there, you can't see closely the eyes of the man looking at the man with the body bag, but there's many therapists, friends who have been through treatment as I have, who maintain that it's not what you do in war, it's what you witnessed that lives in your dreams the rest of your life. Next. This flag is everywhere. It's just out of this world to see. And of course, since we live in California, some of you might say, my God, that looks like Santa Monica. And that is one of the many, many beautiful beaches in Vietnam. That flag is everywhere in Vietnam, Socialist Republic of Vietnam. Next slide. I selected the most emblematic slides that I could represent these days of immersion in Vietnam, bearing in mind, as the title portrayed, Vietnam is a country, not a war. That is one of the paintings in the museums that Peter, who's with us here today, visited, a museum of art that almost looks like Cezanne. And all the workers in it are all the children of Agent Orange. As they say with gallow humor in the veteran world, Agent Orange is the gift that keeps on giving, since we continually lose men to Agent Orange. From the landing in Hanoi late at night, alone, the same way I was transported to my duty station on Hill 10 56 years ago, alone, I was immediately taken back in time by the smells, bamboo, endless motorbikes, and women still dressed in traditional long robe dresses. The most poignant visual was the prolific display of that flag, the Republic of the Socialist Republic, Republic of Vietnam. They swear they're not communist. Thousands of them still hang after the New Year celebration known as Tet. I say, so this is what unity looks like. The plan was to meet my pals the next day in Way City, so I was on my own for that night. I strolled out of my spectacular $40 a night hotel room for some supper, knife on my hip, just in case. I later learned that there is virtually no violence here. I never saw one policeman the whole time. We were encouraged to not wear any military gear, and I did not. However, I was reminded to take the iconic Vietnam keychain flag off my fanny pack. That Vietnam only lives in America. That's this flag. And it was a Vietnamese person that shared with me. You see this all over America, bumper stickers, Vietnam veteran hats, and all that. Is there any other country we fought a war in where we wear their flag? There's none. That is so wild. But the Vietnamese people say, well, we don't have a country anymore. Well, we do have a country. It's inside your country. So that flag is not to be worn in Vietnam because that's the flag of the former South Vietnamese, which is now all over America. Next slide. I was told, however, that some older Vietnamese men, my wife's in there. I took that picture because it does look like Santa Monica, and I was hoping someday my wife and I would sit at that beach. I was told, however, that some older Vietnamese men still wear their military clothing. And sure enough, a couple blocks into my walk in the nearby hamlet, I spotted a man wearing an NBA Army helmet. Did I flinch? Yupper, I sure did, but snapped into real time right away as he waved. So I guess they do like us now, I say. I arose at 4 a.m. like the old days for the flight to Way to hook up with my buddies, Peter Sternberg, psychotherapist who works with combat veterans and Holocaust survivors and their families, and Jerry Lane, who served in the Navy on the USS Saratoga. We were greeted by our tour guide. They call them minders. Tuan Tron, a former ARVN soldier whose father fought the French at Dien Bien Phu. A large Mercedes van awaited us, the same van we would have for the next 3 weeks. So able to leave most all of our gear in there each day. I learned on day 3 that not every tourist has this type of government-approved guide who was educated at University of Way in military history. Next slide. I wish I had the time to share all that we learned. Much of was like the Paul Harvey rest of the story. That's China Beach, by the way. We stayed I was on the 7th floor of that hotel. And I swear that looks, China Beach is more prosperous looking than Newport Beach. It's pretty phenomenal to see. This man, Tuan, our guide, would be taking us to 23 more battle sites, places not all visitors are permitted to visit. 8 of those sites were mine. Others were where many of my Marines lost their lives. The areas we visited had the highest KIA ratios of the war. There is simply not time to share all of those. Our first day trip was up the Perfume River, the location of many, many battles. I honestly felt like I was in a scene in Apocalypse with Martin Sheen. In fact, I turned to Peter, who's here with us, and said, "You remind me of Martin Sheen." Yet I felt a very paradoxical, potent peace. The Buddhist phrase, "the place is the healing," came to mind. I immediately bonded with the mother and 10-year-old boy who operated the Sandpam and was reminded of who I fought the war for the first time. And here are these humble, reverent, exceedingly polite people steering us up the river and making a stable living off tourism. I say to myself, by God, something good turned out good of all this. Excuse me. Next slide. The first docking was a Buddhist memorial temple. That's an apartment overlooking China Beach. They say it's a hotel, but I was told somebody lives up there sometimes. The first was a docking, was a Buddhist temple where civilians lost their lives between the 7,000 tons of bombs we dropped, more than World War II and Korea combined. We lit some incense, and I felt a silence encased inside normal silence, like when the coffin lid shuts. The reverence of this pagoda was like a spiritual bubble, and I stood motionless in front of maybe 5,000 headstones all total, with piped-in Buddhist chants in the background. The second intrusive thought came from another scene in Apocalypse. The horror, the horror, the horror. I was not sure when or how I would make my peace with Vietnam, but it came spontaneously when Tuan and I just embraced each other at that memorial with mutual sorrow. This memorial gravesite was mostly all civilians, women and children. Their fathers had been drafted to fight the war of independence from imperialism, as they defined it. I asked Tuan how long an ARBN tour was. He quizzically grins and says, "About 14 years in the jungle. Mine was 16 months. Fighting for independence is in their DNA. In fact, it's been in their DNA for centuries, having vanquished 3 Chinese dynasties, Japan in 1945, France in 1954, United States in 1975. I guess it is clear who knew their territory the best." Needing to keep this somewhat concise, I will offer up some pictures and just throw in some commentary as they roll here. Some of the places that we visited will be etched in memory for life, but not in nightmares anymore. More like a shepherd leading his sheep to new pastures to graze. If there's any veterans in the group there, I will just rattle through the places that we've been, and maybe one day when Peter sent me 4 discs of videos. We were at the Citadel, 2.5 by 2.5 square miles. I thought it was just a building years ago. The Hanoi Hilton, the Hanoi War Museum, which is very, very sobering. Chu Lai, Dong Ha, Hoi An, monster tunnels. The DMZ, Quezon, Rockpile, Hamburger Hill, Camp Carroll. The places I was, Arizona Territory, they called it, Dodge City, multiple landing zones, High Van Pass, My Hill 10, outside of Da Nang, home of the 7th Marines, China Beach, Da Nang Air Force Base, Mag 16, and Marble Mountain, where I climbed 1,200 steps to the top. And we went inside, it's probably a quarter of a mile down, a 2,000-year-old cave where the NBA had hospitals and housed themselves. Another one of their underground things. Next slide. I'll go through these slides pretty quick. That is China Beach. And right looking down there is where Phil Caputo landed in March 1965 with the 9th Marines. And if any of you recall the pictures, they put lays around their neck. They never took fire, never saw the enemy. And for the next 10 years, most of us seldom saw the enemy face to face. That is a Buddhist 70-foot statue of a woman. I thought in America, all you saw statues of women would be Mary, the Virgin Mary. I didn't realize there were so many female Buddhist statues. Next slide. A lot of Buddhism, some Catholicism, and even in leftover Confucianism. Now, this was at a roadside where we stopped for coffee. That's sculpturing. But like my Texas brother said, you don't think you fought that war for rice, do you? Well, there's rubber plantations everywhere. So the tires on your car out in the parking lot may very well have come from the rubber plantations in Vietnam, explaining why so many countries wanted to own Vietnam. Not just the rubber, but minerals, titanium, and of course oil off the South China Sea. Next. Oh, Lord, this was near the end of the trip. Peter will remember. I wasn't sure I could bond. That's an NVA colonel and a MiG pilot. And I sat there while Peter was talking to him with my fist clenched so tight, I thought it was just going to bust my hand open, and then realized everything was safe, especially when I saw all those pictures on the wall of brigadier generals and former Phantom pilots that had all come to break bread with him. And the video of this is just so, oh, it's just out of this world. We went out and walked down the street in front of his house, and I just started singing, "We're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz," and then began to sing, "All we are saying is give peace a chance." Yes, we arm wrestled, but we never finished. And that man is going to live a long half-life with me. I made peace with an NBA, as I believe he did. He's very popular in Vietnam, I hear. Very popular man in Hanoi. Next. Try to go faster through these. I did leave out lots of things that were a little uncomfortable, but I felt obliged to put in one scene from My Lai, a very difficult place to get through. The museum and the leftover foundation of the hamlets that were burnt, and the trench where Lieutenant Calley was ordered his men to put all the Vietnamese in, and that's where the term came from. I think it was Colonel Henderson said, "Put your weapon on the family plan." And that was very difficult to complete that museum tour. Next. That is very, very, very far underground. We were told that those walls are about 4 feet thick of concrete. The command center for Ho Chi Minh and General Giap, who strategized the whole war, was a school teacher. He never was in the army. That's the man who played chess with us. Next. So Ho Chi Minh Trail. How do you like that? Very close on the left side of the Laotian border. So while we brought in supplies in C-130s, big monster planes, artillery, Chinooks, everything, they're bringing all their supplies down 24/7. We generally didn't work after 5 o'clock, at least not in the supply world. and they're bringing it down on bikes. Tens of thousands of North Vietnamese supplying their army in the south. Next. That's more of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Just imagine that just loaded in the middle of the night with bicycles and rice and weapons and all. They never stopped, 24/7, continually supplying their troops. Next. I don't think there's many more. Next one. Um, ha. That is an area you may have seen in probably movie clips and all that. Pretty dense, huh? Pretty hard to find the enemy in a forest like that. Some of the most dense forests I've ever seen in my life. But that is where we defoliated. That one in the next slide will show where napalm and Agent Orange was dropped to get rid of all that foliage so that you could see, get rid of the forest, so you could see where the enemy was underneath, except they weren't underneath the trees, they were underneath the ground. Next. Well, no, they were in the trees at times, sorry. But that defoliation, that's, you know, they're one day gone the next. That's the kind of jungle area that we just defoliated. Biological warfare, it's called. I mean, chemical warfare, not biological. We didn't know what Agent Orange was then. Next. Just an example of the silliness of some officers who thought that we were like the British for some reason, you know, we're going to attack online, going across a rice paddy, just sitting ducks out there. Those guys are probably walking in 2 feet of water with all that gear, 40, 50 pounds on their back. And the enemy wore pajamas. And they're having us attack online, you know, like it's the British or something. It was pure insanity. Next. One of the many, many pagodas. I say 20. I'm guessing you include the roadside pagodas and all that. This is just one of the more spectacular ones. Next. All memorializing the dead. And this one is pretty signature. When Peter Tuan would buy incense for us, and we burnt a lot of incense there. And that's the place where that was the largest cemetery that we ever visited. Next. That's the front. There's probably 3 or 4 more of those on both sides, and then more like that in the back. Very sobering. Very sobering. Clearly as reverent as Arlington. Next. Those are all from the bombings. The reason I put that up there, not just the phrase, is I'm reminded of all the gear we wore and the constant towel around your neck. I still have my towel, one of the few things I have. All the stuff we wore and the things we carried, as Tim O'Brien says, and they wore pajamas. Next. Another sample of coming down the Ho Chi Minh Trail with all their supplies. That's probably an ammo box. On bicycles. Tens of thousands. That's reminiscent of what Undersecretary of State Ball said in 1964 in the Pentagon Papers. you're going to have a hard time winning because if you send 10,000, they'll send 100,000. Next. Oh God, yes. Um, that is a, well, you can tell what it is. It's just a monster loudspeaker. That's what the NVA, that's right at the DMZ. And I don't think I included a picture of the DMZ. The DMZ, you wouldn't know that it's there. It's a piece of white paint across a bridge. On one side was the north, and the other side's the south. That was the DMZ, 17th parallel. Those were used to pipe in psyop stuff, to pipe into the jungle, screaming back at the soldiers, the Marines, soldiers, Army, everyone. Marine, you die tomorrow. Marine, you die tomorrow. Didn't scare us though. Next. Well, it scared us, but we knew what they were doing, so. That is one of the 13 tunnels, I believe, in that area. Behind, I didn't capture the picture, but behind is like a 10-yard wide B-52 crater bomb that hit. And those are the tunnels that go maybe 1,000, 1,200 meters out to the sea. Architecturally brilliant, the way they were designed. And that's our guide, Juan. Drew, he called himself. Next. And there's the tunnel that I never thought I could make it through because I was caught in a tunnel with incoming rounds. Thought I was going to asphyxiate in the back of it with no oxygen. And I've had a tunnel syndrome ever since. Not claustrophobia, just tunnel and cacophony noise of people hollering and screaming. Those tunnels, those little cubbies off to the side, is where Vietnamese lived during the bombing. There were 17 children born in that tunnel. There were nurses in there. There were families that just lived in those little cubbies. And thanks to Peter and Jerry, I made it all the way down and all the way back. And I would like to say, I think I released that terrible tunnel syndrome. Next. Ha. Peter bought those for me. They're for jet lag. And when I wore them at the layover in Taiwan and Taipei, there were children that stopped and looked because they thought I was an alien, and then wore them again in Tokyo airport on the way out. And I'd have to say, Peter and friends of the club here, I believe they worked. I forgot the name of them, but they're supposed to prevent jet lag, and I think they worked. And last slide. This is it. Coming home. When I came home alone, no one to this day has ever figured out who made that up. You never came home with the men you served with, came home alone with other people, men from other units. But we got to Paris, to Treasure Island on a Friday. The office people didn't work after 4 o'clock. It was just an awful experience. And we ultimately were given $50 and we went across the Golden Gate Bridge and walked around alone by ourselves. But this time, when I came home, when I walked under that sign, whoa, pretty tearful for me. And my daughter was out front with my grandson with the big sign that said, "Welcome home." That's the replacement memory. That one's going to stick with me. So to conclude, some things are not meant to be forgotten or easily tucked away. The vision of infantry combat, the sight of young men killing and dying, is one of those things. Look at the soldiers in both of Ken Burns' documentaries on World War II and Vietnam. I was interviewed by Ken Burns, but I didn't make the final cut. There really is no such thing as closure for soldiers who have survived war. There is a reframing, however. We have an obligation and a sacred duty to those who fell to bear witness to the insanity of war, says my old friend and now deceased Joe Galloway, who also served as a journalism mentor. Though our presentation to the world has been mangled and rearranged by a difficult duty past, we are all the more dedicated to responsible independence, to a healthy preservation of community, and an accountable transparency in all of our leaders. Amen. Carry on. Peter, oh look, my God, there's a crowd there. Hey, hey. Everybody's muted clapping. But I can hear it. I can hear it. I can see your smile, Anita. Peter, all the way from Chicago.
All right, if we'd like to unmute ourselves and we're going to have an open discussion for a while. Ask Mike any questions you want about his trip, about his experiences, about his presentation. Who would like to go first?
Well, I just want to say thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Richard.
Audio now on.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I wanted to ask you, you went, say, from the Hilton, Hanoi to the DMZ in North Korea. How far was that in time? How did you travel there?
Oh, we were in a big van the whole time that Peter and his buddy helped pay for. They paid the big money for this exclusive guide. The DMZ from Hanoi is not very far.
Oh, okay.
It's very anticlimactic to just see a piece of white paint across a bridge.
Mhm.
They don't memorialize anything American. Only these guides know the sites where everything happened.
So was it, when you say not very far, was it a 2-hour drive?
Oh no, Peter, how far?
From Hanoi to the DMZ or
Yeah, Hanoi. Yeah.
gosh, that's hard for me to answer. I remember it this way. We hit the DMZ when we were in the Central Highlands.
No.
We were in the Central Highlands, and that's when I thought we went to the DMZ, and then we flew up to Hanoi. So it's
There you go.
probably a good 5 hours.
I'm sorry, that was my computer.
Yeah.
I would imagine 5 hour drive from Hanoi to the DMZ.
Oh, okay, thank you. That's what yeah. Okay, thanks. And thank you too. Thank both of you very much for your service.
Lit Bucket has joined the meeting.
Yeah. What did that say?
It was just my computer. I'm going to go on mute because there.
I think the takeaway, members of the California Writers Club, is the unbelievable, and like the t-shirt says, Vietnam is a country, not a war. They are so strikingly prosperous that it's, even though it's a rather flip joke, that my underwear and my LL Bean clothes come from Vietnam, so therefore I did something worthwhile. But there's factories and people working, and the prosperity is just overwhelming to see. And they did it without any reparations, without any help. Peter, I guess I should say the joke that Tuan flipped on us. One day when we were waiting for him to return to the van, I think he was just going to the restroom, and he shows up at the van and he says, I just said, one of us said, well, where were you, Tuan? He says, Oh, no problem. I'm not leave Americans in a lurch like you. Oh,
Oh,
Ouch.
you know, if we hadn't, you know, at that point in time, we'd been together for a week. We trusted each other, we bonded, and that's just some raw truth. I mean, we just left them in a lurch. The war had to end. We all know that, but we just boogied really fast. And it was good to laugh like that. That was I'd call it a purging laugh. Say we won't leave you in, I won't leave you in a lurch, Juan would say.
Mike, we have a couple of comments in the notes. Anita said that there's a shrine in Adelanto, north of Highway 395, to Kuan Yin, Gunyin Lady Buddha. I did not
Oh,
know we
wow.
had that.
In Adelanto, of all places.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Adelanto. And then Linda Buroff says she appreciates your insights, information. Thank you for being open regarding your feelings during your experiences.
The credit goes to Peter. He's the one that invited me. That's pretty unique.
Michael, I don't know if you can hear me. Please
Yeah.
let me know if you can. Okay. I've never been in a war, and I only know a few people that were in Vietnam, but it's striking to me how Germans now think a lot that California is still full of cowboys and Indians and a lot of desert. And we kind of have the same view of Vietnam being mass TV. We see it as jungle and cone hats, the shade hats, and everybody running around in white pajamas. So the concept of coming forward 50 years has not quite settled in unless you actually go exploring and bring yourself up to date. So I do appreciate what you've done, and it really helps to bring us forward because we've never been in your boots. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. There are some people that believe that with those little islands that China built, God forbid that this ever comes forth, but they do have some of the richest oil reserves in the world off the South China Sea, which is why Shell, Standard Oil, Exxon are all drilling there. My father said on his deathbed once, you should go to China Beach before it looks like Huntington Beach with little oil rigs going up and down. But there are allies now, and God forbid they need us again. I don't see that happening, but they're getting a lot of manufacturing, as you probably know, just following any surface news. There's a lot of stuff that's coming out of Vietnam and not China. And it'd be nice if there's more of that.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Okay.
Anita.
Mike, the shrine that's in Adelanto is Vietnamese Buddhist, and you can go there on the grounds. They have programs. I put a link to their website in the comments. They also have meditation times.
Okay.
And it's a very tall statue of Kuan Yin that they have there. It's very striking. When they started building there, they basically had Kuan Yin And that was all they had before they had built the buildings. Now they have a monastery there and monks that live there, as well as programs and activities for the Buddhist community. But thank you for your program. It's fascinating to me. I've had some people who are able to work from wherever they are, and they have been telling me how wonderful it is to be in Vietnam. And that was not a place that I had thought of as, you know, being able to just work from wherever. And I started looking into it, and appreciate you going there and taking a trip and sharing that with us. But,
One of those 5-star hotels, not all of them, one of them was $70 a night.
yeah,
You can't even get a Motel 6 for $70.
right.
Not here.
Yeah, you're kind of at BLM campsites. I mean, that's kind of like similar things. That's about it.
And when we say 5-star, we mean it, right, Peter? They were 5-star.
Unless they weren't.
Unless
Unless they
we-
weren't.
we didn't have those pictures. They
When we were out in the hinterlands, we had more rustic accommodations.
Mike, I'm just curious. In this presentation, you gave us a lot of examples of experiences where you let go of different things that had been in your psyche, things that had been weighing on you throughout your life until you went on this trip. Were you even aware that you had these things weighing on you, or was it surprising to you when you went to Vietnam and your tunnel phobias and your feelings toward different people and things, and how cathartic this was for you? Were you even aware of these things that were holding on to you?
Oh yes, and my wife's down there to confirm that. There were times I did stab my pillow at night thinking it was Viet Cong, and nightmares of some POWs I had to watch. I left all that out, but yet, well, Peter would confirm, yes, we had many purging ceremonies, a couple of them burning a death card, since you asked. Death cards are the things that really macho males would throw on BC who were killed, and you'd throw it on the BC. I will apologize for the swearing here, but I'm just going to portray what was said. So you'd kill a Viet Cong, and then you'd throw a death card on him and say, "Dead all the way, motherfucker," as if you were proud of it. And I never did that. I was around men that did, and I guess I just wasn't that hardened to be able to pull something off like that. But it's the white heat that was in soldiers, the revenge that you felt if you lost somebody the day before. And I burned that card on the hill I was on outside with Peter. And we've got a video of that. We did a little ceremony of me burning that death card. And that's what I mean, the stain on the soul. I just let it go. Peter's a martial arts expert in Qigong, and we were down at China Beach, and I went out on the beach and I was doing Qigong with him. And at one point I just felt like a pelican, like I'm just letting all this go out to sea. And for whatever's to be said about somatic therapy, I've had every therapy known to man. I've been gestalted TM. I've been a VA guinea pig for 20 years. EMDR, biofeedback, all that. Lucky. I mean, very lucky to be picked for that. So to answer your question, yes, I dealt with all that before going. And a gestalt, I guess is what you'd call it. Peter's the therapist. It just got left there. It worked. I didn't know if it would or wouldn't. I was afraid I'd get more triggered and come home all goofed up. Everyone is afraid of that. Because we were in the jungle with the tour guide. I mean, we went deep in the jungle a couple times, and I wondered if I would, same as walking on patrol, I wondered if I would just go dinky dow, as they say. But it never happened. And I think a lot of that is because of that man there, Peter and Jerry. It's I was with my buddies, you know, so you have a trust factor, almost like being on patrol. So no, I never got triggered in any big way that I know of. Peter will tell me if I'm lying.
Oh, I didn't see you be that way. I saw the transformation that comes with acknowledgement that when we as Americans were able to take responsibility for the madness of atrocities and war crimes that our poor soldiers were forced into committing from a government that knew in 1963 and certainly in 1965 because they wrote it. They wrote memos. It said this war is unwinnable, and yet they took us all down this path. And when I say they took us all, I feel for myself that I'm a part of the they. I'm not separating the they from me, because as a citizen of this country, I benefit from all of the efficiencies that our warlords are able to bring us. So there's no distancing here, and to go with that kind of commitment and honesty. What I saw you go through, Mike, what I went through, what Jerry went through, and what our guides went through with us, they were touched by what we did. They said, "Thank you for caring about our people." It took a lot to get through to them. But when they saw us leaving memorial stones and lighting incense over and over and over again, they said, each one of them said, independent of each other, "Thank you for thinking of our people." That when we heard that, we knew we had taken care of our business.
It was very spontaneous hugging with Twan. Probably much more potent because it was spontaneous. Peter and I were encouraged to read a book before we went. It was very, very difficult to get through. I pretty much almost didn't, and then did. Peter said, "Read the end." It's a not very old publication entitled "Kill Everything That Moves." And it's about all the reported atrocities, 241 of them to be exact, of court-martials in Vietnam. And since you guys are writers, you certainly know what the term red herring means. It almost, historically, looking at this retrospectively, it almost looks like My Lai, which everyone knows was bad to the bone and awful. And we know about Lieutenant Calloway, and he was pardoned and all that. But that served as a red herring, drawing attention away from the 241 court-martials. These are archives that were recently discovered and released. Archives of court-martials, can't be any fake news there, Dusty, for us journalists out there that corroborate everything. Testimonies of what happened. Not all of them as bad as My Lai, but certainly bad. And the court martials vanished. They were shredded years ago. The documents are there that they were opened, but then there was no results of the court martials. And I learned in that book that my friend Phil Caputo, who wrote Rumor of War, he was court-martialed, and then it was dropped. So knowing that in country, oh, I know it just elevated the sorrow part, because we were so frustrated by the tactical skill of guerrilla warfare, tactical beyond our scope, that it just made everyone revengeful and mad. And these are boys. We were boys. It made you crazy. It made you crazy. And we left that there. We left that there. And we left our own little modest request for forgiveness. There's other things that were moral. There was a just war aspect that was going on. We thought we were fighting communism. We were told we were. Ho Chi Minh didn't even like the communists, most of them. We learned there he had 17 different names. He played everybody. And if you read the book, we're rambling here, so just say when you got to stop, Mike. We read another book that is just one of the best ever. I had it on my shelf for years, but never could pull it off. It's Francis Fitzgerald, Fire in the Lake. And it's just woven with the whole history of how the Vietnamese managed to never really side with anyone. I guess it was tactical at times. But Tuan and others shared with us that fierce desire for independence. As one NBA officer said, well, we didn't necessarily want to win, we just didn't want to lose. And we knew we could outlast you for 10 years, which is what they did. And one little tactical war story here, those hill battles were scripted, not unlike a coach with a game plan. So Ho Chi Minh and Giap knew that Americans want to take hills. You know, Iwo Jima, all that. Americans, that's their job. You take the hill. Well, that was scripted as a tactic. So Hamburger Hill, Khe Sanh, Camp Carroll, all these monster hills up in the mountains. By strategically knowing that the soldiers and the Marines would want to take those hills, what did he do? He emptied the cities. It was all a trick. And Tuan, the Arvins will admit it. Retired soldiers now will admit it. I'm not saying anything certainly unpatriotic. I've been to 30 years worth of reunions of my 7th Marines group. They'll all acknowledge that it was a chess game that we caught on to at times, but not all the time. The hill battles. And God, I mean, all I can say is they knew what they were doing, man. They knew what they were doing. And I was an FO at one point, and I called in some of that ordnance. So you would just strafe a whole area of the jungle and even feel a sense of power when an A-10 comes over you and you strafe and you go, yeah, man, yeah, get some. And then 20 minutes later, a Viet Cong sniper's up in a tree dropping your men. Oh, wow, my God, Jesus. How do you fight this? You know, and there's some that would say, sorry, ladies and gentlemen, we still haven't learned. There's something to throw in, Peter, is when the colonel, you either asked him or he was sharing with us, he said, it's a shame you never learned a thing from the French. You never learned, we didn't like them, even though Truman and Eisenhower, we paid for the French in Dien Bien Phu. We funded 70% of the war before we ever went there. We were funding the French army with Truman and Eisenhower. And then we went in rather surreptitiously with the CIA and all that. And those guys were just, they hung out in the hotels and fancy places, and they're drunk, and they thought they knew what they were doing with this guerrilla warfare stuff. But the colonel, and this is a phrase that's used often by the Vietnamese. So how did you fight the most powerful military force on the planet? He says, we had to grab you by the belt buckle, meaning they stayed so close to us that the ordnance, the artillery was of no use. And they knew that. They would just stay close. They'd close and then disappear. Attack and disappear. Drive you nuts. Absolutely nuts. Even if a dust-off pilot would come into an LZ, either inserting soldiers or taking them away, they knew that the American soldier it'd take about 10 minutes to get their shit together, to call in ordnance, to call in howitzers or something. And at the 10-minute mark, they'd blow whistles, the NBA. I was mostly fighting NBA. Viet Cong were more in the South. They blow whistles. They're gone. They disappear. Because they knew in 10 minutes that's when the ordnance would come in. And that's what's called psyops, I guess. But then Colonel Mai, Antoine, said, you never learned a thing from the French. We didn't like them. We didn't think they were brave, I guess. I think that's kind of cruel. They lost, so we didn't want to listen to them. And I remember saying to Peter and Jerry in the van, my God, even the NFL watches tapes of losing teams. Why didn't we learn a thing from them? No answer to that. We just didn't want to.
Well, I think we all, I feel like this has been one of the most incredible meetings I've been to in a long time. I feel like this is holy ground, and I appreciate so much, Mike, you sharing your experiences, your thought. I think we all appreciate everything that you and Peter have shared with us tonight. So let's give Peter and Mike a big hand and thank them for their service, and thank them for the time that they shared with us tonight.
Peter, and they're all coming up to the mountain in 2 months to visit us mountain folks, right, guys?
Sounds
Maybe
good.
they'll come to an elder warrior.
Oh yeah, come look up Elder Warrior when you get home. Come to our retreat.
We
It's
need
open to civilians, by the way.
we need civilians in order to do the retreat, because it's an encounter between civilians and veterans.
Sounds interesting. Mike, let
So
me
you're
have
all
the let me have the information and we'll publicize it.
It's elderwarrior.org, and then I'll send it to you.
All right, sounds good. Thank you,
Thank you so much,
everyone.
guys.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you again, Peter and Mike. I really appreciate what you've done for us. You've taken us places that are just incredible, absolutely incredible. Thank you again for everything you've done.
55 years ago, no one would have listened to this. God bless you all.
Good night, everybody.